While the Cabinet and the Secretaries of State feature 24 new faces, a number of old faces remain from Trudeau's cabinet, several pegged to play key roles in managing Canada-U.S. relations. Here with me to discuss all of this is Ontario Conservative MP Kyle Seeback, who joins me now. Kyle Seeback, welcome to the show. It's good to see you, sir.
Thanks very much. Happy to be here.
So Mark Carney said this was a brand new government, purpose-built to meet the moment. Your leader is unconvinced. What's the concern with what we saw today?
I mean, I'm skeptical as well. If you look at sort of the core of what's been put together, it looks remarkably similar to the government under Justin Trudeau. The key ministers are all the same. And when you look at the record of the last 10 years, they're a big part and a big responsibility for that record, you know, with housing prices, with inflation, with crime. All of these things that Canadians have been very unhappy about and were unhappy about in the election, the people that supported the policies that led to all of that now have key roles in this government. So to me, it's kind of like the Who song that we sort of call Teenage Wasteland, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. That's kind of what it looks like to me.
Okay, so it's the Baba O'Reilly cabinet in your view, right?
Yes.
Well, look, I wonder, I mean, you were elected, what, in 2019, right? First, correct?
I was elected in 2011 originally, but I took a brief vacation.
Yes, you had a hiatus there.
Yes.
Well, so you've been under Mr. Harper, Mr. Scheer, Mr. O'Toole, and now Mr. Poilievre as leader.
That's correct.
Very different approaches under those four men. Mark Carney seems like a very different leader and prime minister than Justin Trudeau was. So is it not plausible that a change of that significance in that job can shift how everyone below him functions?
I mean, look, I hope for Canadians' sake that there is a change, because the last 10 years really have not been great for Canadians and for Canada in general. Whether you look at, you know, per capita income, you look at the crime stats, you look at housing prices. I know I look at them. The average housing price in my town of Orangeville, where I live, is $750,000. So if you put like just a small down payment, 10%, you got to save $75,000, and then you have a $675,000 mortgage. So this is a real problem. I have a 21-year-old son, and he wants to buy a house. It's going to be very hard for him to afford a house. And with the key ministers that brought in all of these policies, whether it was the mess in immigration, whether it is the housing accelerator that didn't accelerate anything, you know, all of these things, nothing has really, the key ministers haven't changed. So I think it's going to be a real challenge for Mr. Carney to change the direction of the ship. But I hope for Canadians' sake he does, because we do need change.
Right. Look, there's no question the immigration escalation created a lot of challenges. The housing accelerator may be too early to fully judge its effectiveness, right? Because I know municipalities say they like it. It is unlocking some zoning changes and could help with reducing costs by paying for some infrastructure. But I want to go back to something that Mr. Poilievre said there off the top. Am I right in understanding his words when he says, when it comes to dealing with the Canada-U.S., we will support them? It's almost like he's drawn a line of division between the foreign policy issues they're dealing with and the domestic challenges that kind of take it easy a bit on the Canada-U.S. thing, but really focus the accountability function on the domestic side of things. Am I reading that approach correctly?
Well, I think what it's showing is the importance of the Canada-U.S. relationship. I used to be the Shadow Minister for International Trade, so I know that, you know, 70% of Canadian GDP, approximately, give or take, during the year, is based on trade, and again, approximately 70% of that is with the United States. So that's 49% of the Canadian economy is tied to trade with the United States, approximately. So that relationship, we want to be successful. And of course, if we can help make that relationship successful, that's just good for Canada. It's good for Canadians, good for Canadian workers, and something we would want to support.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, when Parliament comes back, Mr. Poilievre's not going to be there until after the by-election out in Alberta. But does that mean that that becomes an issue that is not so much central to the theater of question period that happens every day? You know what I mean? In terms of like the questions about Donald Trump and the Canada-U.S. relationship, a little bit of a backseat just to sort of not cause disruption in that foreign policy challenge? How should we view the strategy there?
Well, look, I think I don't consider, you know, criticism of things that are being done or things that haven't been done to be a problem, right? If we look at softwood lumber, right? Softwood lumber is a simmering dispute that's cost Canadians tens of thousands of jobs, is still going on. We can be supportive of the government trying to resolve it and saying they need to resolve it, but also critical that it's taken 10 years and nothing has been resolved. So I think that's the approach we're going to take with the relationship with the United States. We want to encourage the government to foster a better relationship, get these trade issues dealt with in a positive way. But if it's not happening, then I guess we will also reserve the right to be critical of that.
Right. So Mr. Poilievre has said he's going to go on sort of a listening tour, right? And sort of speak to people and do a data-driven assessment of what happened in the election, and then figure out what changes that need to be made to grow on the successes you had in this last election. But when you look at things like the carbon tax being gone, Trudeau being gone, this new cabinet today, a more economically focused prime minister, I think it's safe to say, with Mark Carney. I mean, how do you need to adjust how you approach politics as a party? Because what we heard from Mr. Poilievre today started off a little bit new, but then it went into familiar territory.
Yeah.
Is that where you keep going as a party, or do you need to evolve there?
Look, I think I never want to be the Monday morning quarterback, first of all,
Sure.
but we do want to look at what's happened and why we didn't win. We wanted to win. A lot of people had an expectation that we would win. But if you look at the results themselves are pretty good. If you had told me 2 years ago we'd get 41% of the vote and not be government, I would say, I don't think you know Canadian politics or what you're talking about. So 8 million people voted for us. These are good results. But there has to be improvement because we didn't win. And looking at those results, I think, is important, because if you actually look at them, really fascinating. If you look at, for example, Eastern Ontario, we had safe Conservative seats that were winning by 3,000 votes. But at the same time, we won a seat in Brampton and almost won 2 others. Yeah. So there's something very interesting that's happened in this election, and part of figuring out how we take that next final step to where we are the government, we'll be figuring out exactly what that is.
I think that may be a reason why there are 3 MPs from Brampton in the cabinet or in the Secretary of State portfolio today. But you know, I don't know what you heard at your doors, but I've spoken to people who ran for your party in the province of Ontario, that women in particular and older voters, there was a question of tone and style that they weren't comfortable with, especially when facing the external challenges of Donald Trump. So, you know, do you think that needs to change? And with your leader out of the Commons until the by-election, Mark Carney is going to have a bit of runway to do some stuff. Are you worried about sort of them building momentum because of the dynamic in Parliament after this election?
No, I don't think so. We have a great leader who got not the result we wanted, I know that, but got a pretty good result when you look at, again, 41% of the vote, 8 million people voted for him. There are perhaps some people who decided that they did not want to support Mr. Poilievre. It's actually not what I heard at the doors the most. For me, what I heard at the doors the most was Donald Trump. That seemed to be the issue that was taking up most of the criticism that I heard at the doors. And let me tell you, I heard a lot of positive support for our leader, Mr. Poilievre, and for our platform. So I think what we're looking at here is doing a deep analysis and maybe a little bit of fine-tuning. This is not a, throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of situation.
Okay, both Andrew Scheer, who will be the leader in the Parliament when it returns, and Mr. Poilievre has said there may be areas where they can support the Carney government, because even though they're at right around 170 right now, pending some recounts, it's still a minority. Where could you cooperate with this government? Because there hasn't been a lot of signs of fertile common ground for the last number of years. Where could we see working together between the Conservatives and the Liberals in the coming months?
Well, look, as I said earlier, we have a problem with, per capita GDP in Canada, or the earnings that Canadians have. We've fallen far behind the United States. So if we see policies that are going to directly address that, they're going to improve the lives of Canadians, right? Bring home more paychecks, right? Improve the amount of money Canadians are taking home. So, for example, if there's some tax cuts, if we're looking at actually becoming the energy superpower that we should be, that everyone's talked about, we could look at supporting that, because we do need to unleash our natural resources. They're a huge driver of the Canadian economy. So if they're looking at ways to improve pipelines or permitting process for mines a lot faster, I think those are things we could absolutely support. If they finally decided that they wanted to do something about the revolving door of crime, where someone who commits a carjacking or another serious crime and is out on bail the next day, we would look to support that. But it'd have to be real changes, not the sort of fake ones we saw in the last Parliament.
Well, the Prime Minister said today that reducing the carbon tax to zero was his first act last time. The first thing, they got to do supply, and you've got to elect a speaker and those things. But he wants to do a tax cut, effective Canada Day. Now, I know it's not the middle-class tax cut your party ran on, but it is a tax cut for basically everybody. Is that something you can see your party supporting?
I could see it. You have to look at it. You don't know what the details are.
If it lives up to the platform specifics.
Yeah, if it lives up to what they're saying, we'd certainly take a look at that. He did say he's going to cancel the carbon tax, yes, but he also said he's going to increase the industrial carbon tax, which is a real problem. I met with the steel industry a long time ago when I was the Labour shadow minister, and they were saying if the carbon tax goes up, we will not be producing steel in Canada in 5 years. So there's also areas that are going to face sharp criticism with the plan that Mark Carney has put forward for Canadians.
There are a lot of offsets, though, and protections in the output-based pricing system and the large emitting systems for trade-exposed industries, right? So, I mean, there are ways to do this without punishing them. Helping them transition to green power production, for example, is a way to do it.
There is some aspects to that, but
right.
We are making our steel industry uncompetitive. And again, if you look at the United States, there is no output-based pricing system for American steel, and the majority of our steel that gets exported goes to the United States. So our steel producers are at a competitive disadvantage. And suggesting you're going to increase steel or say, you know, how much steel does the average Canadian buy, which Mr. Carney said, which I thought was a ludicrous statement, and not an understanding of how the Canadian economy works, we would have to push back vigorously on things like that.
Okay. Ontario Conservative MP Kyle Seeback, it's good to meet you. Thanks for coming in today, sir.
Thanks very much.